Hello, everybody. As she said, my name is Zachary Steele. I am the founder and executive director of Broadleaf Writers and also author person. And I'm thrilled. I'm always thrilled to do these things. I'm especially thrilled to do this one because I've been wanting to meet Jeffrey for a while and to dig into his book, which I haven't had a chance to do yet. But thank you all for coming out. For those of you who are not familiar with Broadleaf Writers, we are a writing organization based in the Atlanta area, and we do a number of programming throughout the year, including an annual conference in the fall. And if you want to find out more information about us, we're at broadleafwriters.com, and hopefully you'll check out and come into other programs in the future. This is part of a series of programs, the Right Now series, which is mostly virtual, but also we do some in person. And thank you to Jeffrey for making the time for coming out here. Thank you to Eagle Eye for giving us the space, and as always, thank you to you all for coming out. She touched on your bio a little bit, and I want to make sure that everybody is fully aware. So I'm going to read Jeffrey's bio because there's a lot on there. I could say acting and writing and all this kind of stuff, but I feel like there's a lot more to Jeffrey than that. Jeffrey Dale Lofton hails from Warm Springs, Georgia, best known as home of Roosevelt's Little White House. He calls the nation's capital home now, and he has for over 3 decades. During those early years of living in Washington, D.C., he spent many a night trotting the boards of D.C. theaters and performing arts centers, including the Kennedy Center, Signature Theater, Woolly Mammoth, and Studio Theater. He even scored a few television screen appearances, including a residuals-rich Super Bowl halftime commercial, and I'd love to know more about that, which his accountant quipped is the finest work of your career. We'll let you debate whether or not that's a good thing or bad thing. Ultimately, he stepped away from acting, keen to use his stage and screen performers' deep understanding of the art of storytelling in a different way. To that end, he provided communications counsel to some of the nation's leading landscape architects, as together they describe the wonders of a garden well planned. Next, he worked closely with military veterans, helping them all tell their stories of war-torn life and service to their country. At the same time, he focused on pursuing postgraduate work, ultimately being awarded master's degrees in both public administration and library and information science. Today, he is a senior advisor at the Library of Congress, surrounded by books and people who love books, in short. CLAY SUZIE is his first novel, fictionalized memoir written through his personal lens, growing up a gay, physically misshapen outsider in a conservative family and community in the Deep South. So first and foremost, welcome to Jeff. Thank you. And I do feel there's a lot more in that bio than just acting and writing. So a lot of good service. Library of Congress is not a small thing. And, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So excited to be here.
Yes, excellent. So today we're going to talk a little bit about CLAY SUZIE first. And then we're going to dig into writing a fictionalized memoir and some of the pitfalls and things to avoid or things to do right, or we'll let Jeffrey talk about it. He has some things to say. And it's a very interesting concept, the idea of taking personal life story and telling it in a way that allows you some leeway for fiction. And very interested to hear what you have to say about that. But first, we would be doing it a disservice if we didn't say, tell us a little bit about CLAY SUZIE. What made you want to write this story, and even why did you decide to take the fictional route?
Well, CLAY SUZIE is about a little boy named Philbert, and he is born in Warm Springs, Georgia, gay, with a significant skeletal malformation of the chest. And it is a fictionalized memoir. I share these are things that I share with Philbert. Philbert is fueled by tomato sandwiches and green milkshakes, and he is obsessed with cars, starting with this Matchbox car. This is a 1968 Mercury Cougar, and this was my favorite toy as a child. It has doors that open. Matchbox cars, if you know them, they have moving pieces, trunks that open. Yeah, Benji knows. This one has the doors. And I and Philbert imagine that these doors were wings that flew him and me to places that only existed in our imagination. This little car saved my life. And beyond that, he one of his very favorite things to do, especially when he's younger, because this story takes us through Philip's life from his 4th through his 18th year. He loves to dig potatoes from the garden that separates his house from Granddaddy's, because you never know what you're going to get when you dig them up. He loves that. He encounters a series of events that destroy his innocence, shake his confidence, and make him feel as though he's not worthy of the attention of an older boy, Knox, he idolizes to distraction. Ultimately, he finds refuge in unexpected ways from unexpected people in unexpected places. And it is ultimately an uplifting story. So that's, in a sort of large nutshell, Red Clay Suzie. And why did I write it? It may help to actually tell you a little bit about how I wrote it, which will explain why I wrote it and why I wrote it as a fictionalized memoir instead of a memoir. I started writing Red Clay Suzie soon after I left home to attend LaGrange College, which is a small liberal arts institution in LaGrange, Georgia, you probably know. And the very best thing about LaGrange and LaGrange College was that they were away from where I grew up, Warm Springs. And soon after I got to college, I found that I was in crisis. Years of pushing down. I'd gotten really good at pushing down humiliation and frustration and fear and anger, because from the earliest age, 4 or 5, back when we're called youngins, I was the target of bullying and derision and body shaming from members of even my own family. And being away from home for the first time is when it started to really surface and come out. And so as a natural instinct, I started to write it all down. I started to journal. I didn't know I was writing a novel, but it was so helpful. It was like an expunging of my insides. I've come to call it an exorcism by exposition. And it was so comforting. It was like a salve on everything. It really was. And so at one point, coursework just got in the way. And I didn't have the time or the headspace or the energy or the strength really to go on writing. And so I put it away until I could get my college sea legs under me. I had every intention of going back, but I didn't go back for 30 years. So this is why I went back. I've always loved to read. And I read 2 books in succession. So fast forward to several years ago, and I read 2 books in succession. I reread Harper Lee's Incandescent to Kill a Mockingbird. Love that book. I read it when I was in high school, but I wanted to reread it with my adult perspective. And there was I recognized Scout in a way that I didn't earlier. So this outsider child, which is what I was. There was just a shock of recognition that I just don't remember. The way she inhabited that world, the way she interacted with those really well-defined characters in that very small town. And then I read Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. I hadn't seen the film. I didn't really know a lot about the book. I still haven't seen the film. But the title, Call Me By Your Name, it just, I can't even describe how it made me feel. But after reading those 2 books, it's the power of literature for me. It just broke me wide open. It was like those 2 books were sticks of kindling rubbed together by the most effeminate Boy Scout you've ever seen. And I was 19 again. And I thought back to those journals of my time in college. And I said, because I'm a pack rat, I keep everything. I pulled those journals out and read them. And I will admit, I was embarrassed by how emotionally present and raw they were. And I thought, I've got to finish this. Whatever it's going to be, I got to finish it. And so I started to write again. on my mobile phone on the subway going to and from my job at the library. And that's how I finished writing it. At some point during writing the first draft, I decided it wasn't really for me anymore. It was for young people who are in crisis today. And I finished writing it, wondering, hoping someone would read it one day, but for them as a roadmap, not a roadmap for a car, but a roadmap for the heart and the mind, hoping that it might help somebody one day. And that is why I wrote it. And I decided to make it a fictionalized memoir because I think it allows a writer to take more license with the story, to make points and explore areas of one's life that maybe didn't happen or could have happened in a different way. And that's why I wanted to make it a fictionalized memoir.
You talk about the journals, and I constantly said that the writing is the cheapest form of therapy available to people.
That's true.
And it's really interesting because in this case, writing fictionalized memoir, you're literally taking those elements of your life and working through them and coming out a little more whole than you were before.
One hopes.
Yes, one hopes. Anyway, so. Well, before we move on, I want to give you the opportunity to read a little bit if you would like.
I would love to. I typically stand, but I don't want to mess up the filming. Is that going to mess up?
You do what you feel you need to do.
Okay. I will try to do it from here. Can everybody see me? Not that there's much to see, but I'll try to do it this way. So this is from the novel is in 3 parts, and this is from the 3rd part. Philbert is almost 16 years old, and he's talking with the older boy I mentioned. His name is Knox, the boy he is just enamored of. Knox doesn't know about this physical malformation of his chest. And Knox, it's a hot day, and Knox wants to go swimming. Oh, and one more thing. Knox has a nickname for Philbert, and that nickname is Keebler. Very important. Okay. Let's go swimming, Knox said. I avoided swimming because it was a shirts off activity. So I said, I don't swim. Oh, I'll teach you. That's okay. Well, everybody needs to know how to swim. I know how, I just don't. Why not? Water gets in my ears. Well, earplugs, they don't really work. Oh, come on, Keebler. It is so hot. Okay, you don't have to get in, but you're coming along. Let's go. And with that, he pulled me out the door by the hand. And then he guided me towards the woods, his hand on the small of my back. And I followed him down a steep, but not deep gully, and into a mostly dried up creek bed. And then we turned and we were out in the open. The sun suddenly making us squint after having been in the cool of the shiny, the piney woods, and a beautiful dark green lake spread out on all sides, surrounded by woods. He sat down and started to take his shoes off. Let's go in. No, I said, way too abruptly. Well, you don't have to put your head under. No. Okay. Before I lost my courage, I admitted, I don't want to take my shirt off, thinking the only thing worse than telling him about my deformity was to leave him thinking I was a total weirdo. Oh, it's just, I never done that. And it's because, Keebler, it's okay. Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I took my shirt off, my chest fully exposed in the sunlight. And I just stood. See? He didn't talk. He just stared. My teenage fantasy was looking at what I spent hour after hour trying to hide. Say something, I thought. Does it hurt? Only when you don't touch it. I said it without thinking. What? Nothing, never mind. Oh. I had never felt more exposed than I did right then. My shirt off with my white, pasty, skinny, malformed bird chest in full view of the boy I loved. I didn't even know if he liked boys, much less freaky me. In the sun, it hurt so much because I could not hide. In the cavity in my chest, it was already a smaller space than my heart needed to function. It just felt more compressed and restricted than usual. But I cherished this moment as much as I hated it. But it hurt so much. Both the blood pumping heart in my chest and the feeling heart, the one I wanted to give to him. Was I going to die right here in front of him? But if I didn't take this chance now, I never would. And if he didn't reject me after seeing my half-sunken chest, I could trust him. I could believe anything that happened after that. He just stared at me. And I couldn't look back. And as embarrassing as it was, the pain was not because I was disfigured and all my organs were fighting for room. I ached because somebody finally saw me.
So it's always one thing, to hear a writer read their work, especially when there's such an emotionally deep connection to it. But it's just entirely unfair to watch you do that and make me want to just sit here and cry with you as you do that, because that was awesome. Thank you. It's me trying to make a joke in a situation. I appreciate it. Didn't fly whatsoever.
No, it did.
No, that was beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
I kind of want to jump to an immediate question off of that. Before I do, I don't always feel like we have to wait to the end of a session to ask questions. So as we're going through this, if you have questions for Jeffrey, by all means, go and throw the hand up in the air and we'll get to them as we go. But I'm just going to, before we get into the fictionalized memoir questions, I'm curious because it is obvious that you have a very, very deep emotional connection to this because it's based on experiences that you had. How difficult was that for you? So I know you had the journals and everything, but how difficult was that for you to compile and put into a book? And how much time did you need when it was done before you looked at it again?
Well, it was very difficult to do. Visiting childhood trauma is difficult, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes people don't do that. I felt compelled to do it. And so as much as it was, it hurt to remember these events, to write about them, the essence of them, even though I fictionalized, the book is fictionalized. There's a lot of truth in the book too. And so it was, as I mentioned, it's like an exposition. An exorcism by exposition. But as much as it hurt, it felt so good to get it out of me. I liken it to coming out. I came out to my family as gay over 30 years ago, and I did it in tears and with shame because I was ashamed. And my parents were ashamed. My parents were mortified. And we've had a lot of years to work through that. And but writing the book was kind of like coming out a second time. Not just part of me, but all of me. Because I've spent my entire life trying to hide both my insides and my outside. And it's exhausting. And I'm done with that. And now I'm not crying. I'm not crying. You're crying. And I'm not ashamed. And I feel lighter. I feel that, and I did this, I started a project for myself, but I finished it for kids who are in crisis today. Do you know that 45% of all queer kids seriously considered killing themselves last year? Mm-hmm. That is unacceptable. And about 20% actually tried. And that just is heartbreaking. And the reason I felt, because I was terrified to let people read it. And I didn't let anybody read it till I had a first draft. But that was bigger than my own fear and pain. And actually, so I've decided part of the proceeds I'm giving to the Trevor Project and the Born This Way Foundation, because of the important work they do to help young people today who are in crisis as I was, 40 years ago. So I feel better. It's good. That's better.
Well, let's talk about fictionalizing the memoir. And I know every writer's going to have a different approach to this sort of thing, but for you, where does it begin? Like, you're starting to assemble everything. How does this become a fictionalized memoir?
Well, I wanted to, I prepared some notes because I didn't want to forget anything, but I wrote down my process, what worked for me, knowing that everybody has their own process, but maybe, and I've got these like all out of order, which is just like me. But I look back at my process, and I wrote it down on cards. And so I want to share with you how I accomplished this, because I've always been a writer. I've always written. I just never told anybody. And I never really completed projects. And I think this experience taught me how to stick to it, and I was going about it in a different way before. So the first thing that I find helpful is to create a time machine. Find a way to take yourself back to that time and place that you want to write about. For me, it was the late 60s and 70s and early 80s for this work. And so I did maybe you'll create a playlist of music. I listen to a lot of 70s pop songs because it makes me feel like a kid again. It makes me feel like I'm riding around in somebody's car, which was, so formative for me, cars, because they feature prominently in the book. But it also reminded me of so many things of that era. It brought back so many memories. It could be anything, though. It could be a toy, a Matchbox car. It could be a jar of red clay to take you back to your home place in Georgia. It could be a piece of jewelry that belonged to your grandmother. Or, my grandfather always had pocket protectors and pens. It could be a pocket protector and pen that he gave me. It could be a photograph. It could be anything. And putting those around your workspace are constant reminders if you need a touchstone to take you back. And I know a lot of people don't write in one place. Some people, take their pad out in the backyard, or they go to the coffee shop. So taking photographs of those items that really take you back to home is a good way to take it with you, make it mobile, or maybe just make a list of items so that you can read it. So that's the first thing that I do when I want to take myself back is to create that time machine for myself. The next thing is journaling. As I said, I didn't know back all those years ago that I was writing a novel. But when I went back to it, it actually looked like a novel. There was dialogue and all kinds of stuff. And a good portion of it is actually in CLAY SUZIE. But the mistake I was always making as a writer is I would just jump into a project. I got a great idea. I know it from beginning to end. And I start writing. And I couldn't sustain it. And I think it's because I hadn't done that foundational work. But journaling is writing, but it's not for the purpose of creating a full chapter or a full set of chapters. It allows you to explore plot points that you might want to put in the book. It allows you to develop characters, like who is in this world. It's a great place to try out dialogue. And so journaling is that safe space that allows you to be really creative because nobody's going to read it. Journals are not for anybody but yourself. So the best place to be bold and put it all out there with holding nothing back is journaling, because it's for nobody but yourself. I find that that's really the richest stuff when you think, nobody's ever going to see this, I could write anything. And so that's why I found journaling to be the key to this process. And so, and like, as Zach said, like, if you want to talk about things, I'm eager to do that too. So questions, please. I'm happy for those. And the next is something that I don't enjoy. Producing a story art outline. How many? So I know there are a lot of writers in the room. How many of you are plotters? Sure. A couple, two, okay. How many are pantsers?
Isn't the pantser the new? I remember what was he had the other day listed what it was. It was like pantsers just fly off.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, you just
Pantsers are like,
Ready,
I'm just gonna
right.
do it. Do
Yeah.
it. Do it.
Seat of the
No
pants.
planning. That's
Yep.
me.
No planning.
That you too. So I am definitely a pantser, but I find that, and this might feel pedantic and like, oh, I don't want to do it. And trust me, I don't want to do it either. But an outline really does, it's important. I never stick to it, which is good because that kills creativity, I think. So what an outline does for me is it keeps me in the it keeps me in the world. It doesn't let me sort of, cross the boundary into a completely different world or book. So that creativity is not stifled. And then I'm able to, to write and stay there. Now, I have to admit, I get off topic. I get off outline. And I outlined this book twice. First at the beginning, and then much, much later into the first draft. But one thing that I also do, because I'm not going to go into a document and look at it. I'm not going to look at a piece of paper taped to the wall. I took sticky notes and I put on the wall behind my computer. And they were in 3 sections because I intended to be in 3 parts. And you can even move those around. So those can have plot points, even really juicy pieces of dialogue. I got to get this in there. I can't forget that. And I found that really helpful because I can move those around. So the outline. The next one is do your research. Now, writing a fictionalized memoir, why do I need to do research? It's my story. It's my world. Well, memory is faulty. And I was writing about, 45, 50 years ago. And there were certain things that I, as a child, I didn't know. I didn't know how much an Xbox car cost. But that's a really easy piece of research to do. But I was really curious about the topography of the land because, I was so focused on the details, on the clay, on the trees around me, but I never thought about the world, the larger world, and the bird's eye view of it. Only that road between our first house and my grandmother's house. That was really the track, that literal track that I remember traveling. And so doing research, I think, is really important. It also gives you a sense of what's going on politically during that time, the socioeconomic dynamics of the region where you are. There's so much that you don't even think about, really, but they do have an impact on your story. And the next is take a deep breath and start writing, which is the good stuff. The best piece of advice I can give here is to just do it. Just write. Even if you don't wait for the muse to come down and sit beside you and tap you on the shoulder, because it may not happen. And don't wait for inspiration of any kind, because it's just really the act of writing. Sitting down and making yourself write. Oh, I do this because I wrote on the telephone. But you might not get very much each day. But over time, it's really developing that muscle and you get better at it. And I found the more I wrote, the more ideas I had, the more memories came back, which was surprising to me. I didn't think it would be that way. I thought I would just run that well dry. But that's what worked for me. And then the last guideline, I have 6 of them. The last guideline is to remember Sketches by Boz. Do you remember Charles Dickens worked for a newspaper in London? And the job was to go out and observe people and then write about them. It was a master at the small details, at capturing the essence of people and then putting them back, putting them in writing. He got in a little trouble at one point there, but discussion for another day. But the point here is to observe the smallest detail. As writers, we see things that other people just walk right past, and that is really what makes me a writer. The act of actually doing it on a regular basis, and telling a story, creating a world based on those observations that others just don't notice. So mentally record things. It can be anything. Someone walking down the street, carrying a cake box with a cell telephone in her ear with a 50-pound dog pulling in a leash. Like, what's the story there? And is she going to draw it? What happens? What does it sound like? There's so many details to capture. And so those are, very briefly, I hope, my guidelines for writing a fictionalized memoir.
I was thinking as you were talking about research and trying to get that clarity of memory, because I know I discovered this with Weight of Ashes, but when you were going back to your childhood times and trying to put together fractured memories of not just your life, but of the world around you, were there any moments where you were like, oh my gosh, I forgot that was a thing, or I forgot that was a popular song, or anything like that, or just general surprises about the lay of the land that you just didn't remember?
Yeah, it's amazing. I had forgotten this, but so I love listening to 70s pop song. This is actually a 60s pop song, but I remembered because it came on the radio. And this is not research. This is my, it's kind of research, I guess. But
you're a writer. You can call anything. I went to Burger King. It was research. I wanted to know how I felt afterward.
That's pretty good. I like that.
Go ahead.
That's okay. But I remember I had two older female cousins. They were probably 10 years older than I was. And I used to love to go over because they had a little record player and they had little singles, and you had the little plastic piece you put in it to fit over the very small LP spindle, I guess. And one of the records they had was Leaving on a Jet Plane by Peter, Paul and Mary, and Puff the Magic Dragon, both of those songs. I think they were both hits, but I think they were on the same record. I don't know. But I loved those songs and I had forgotten about them. But I used to go around singing, not Puff the Magic Dragon, but Leaving on a Jet Plane. Mm-hmm. It was just so mournful and sad, and I didn't know why. I didn't understand it. I didn't know it was a war song. But I had forgotten that. And it came on the radio. Oh my gosh. And it made me think of the brown shag carpet all through that house. And I always thought, that's dirty. So that shag carpet is just dirty. I just know it is. And just so many memories. And the dresses that they got. I remember being there when I got dressed for prom. And I was convinced that, their hair was pulled back really tight and slicked down and had these really severe curls at the bottom. And there was a bow on both of them. And I thought that their mother had put a straight pin in their head to keep that, because there was a little pearl there. And I was convinced that they put a straight pin right into their skull. I just knew that. I didn't say anything. I'm not gonna put a bow in my hair. That won't solve that problem. But memories like that came back. Candy was a big thing for me. And I loved all that candy, and I hadn't had some with the fingers, so I went looking for it. I went online trying to troll for the pink and white and brown Brock's coconut squares. All that, that's really light research. That's not real research. But those were surprises because I'd forgotten so much of that, and how happy some of it made me. Those joyful points in this very dark sort of. The memories were dark, but as I went into that world, I found little points of light, which made me feel a little less heavy. Yeah.
Well, you had touched on this just a little bit, but I wanted to kind of go into it a little bit deeper. If the purpose of a memoir is to tell one's life story. Yeah. So if what you want to do is tell your life story, why fictionalize it? Because I know I've had a conversation with somebody before who kind of insisted that was trying to hide your truths behind fiction. But I'm curious for you, like I said, I know you touched on it a little bit, but well, what is the advantage of going in and fictionalizing something versus just telling it as it was?
Well, I think that even memoirs, so life does not play out in the neat little packages that you find in books, the beginning, middle, and end. This doesn't work out that way. And I think even memoirs, I could be wrong, but I think even memoirs, I think memoirists take a little license and move things around a little bit. But I decided that I wanted to fictionalize it because I wanted to take advantage of that flexibility. You know, move an event that happened maybe in 1968 to 1972 because it served the story better. It also, and it served the story better. I was able to create a more compelling beginning than the end. Also, because I wanted to explore some parts of my life that played out in a particular way that I was curious to know what it would have been like in a different, if I made a different choice. And one example, there's a character, his name is James. He is Philbit's one true friend from first grade through high school. And James is insightful and funny and wise, and he is Black. And he lives in a world where racism is just conscious and unconscious racism is a thing. It is a fact of life in the 1960s and 70s in rural Georgia. And he is like Philbit in that they are both outsiders, but he's different. He's fundamentally different because he sees the world in a different way. He sees the world for what it is. And he helps Philbit see the world as a more inclusive place, actually. But I did not have a friend like James growing up. There was a boy I was drawn to and wanted to be his friend. He was Black. But I was so used to being rejected. I never had a friend that I went and found or reached out to. If I had a friend, it was because that person found me and pulled me into their circle, their world. I was convinced that if I approached him, that he would not want to be my friend. And I also knew on some level that we couldn't be friends. It wouldn't have been allowed because I was white and he was Black. And we were in this really small conservative community. And so I didn't have the courage. I didn't reach out to him. And I wanted to kind of ride along. I wanted to know what that relationship might have been, could have been, if I had had more courage, if I had been brave enough to act. So fictionalizing the memoir let me have this wonderful experience on paper, if not on mind.
Yeah. We got two. We'll go here
Yes.
and then there.
I'm curious, following on that, what your experience working with an editor was, if they asked for changes that were actually autobiographical without realizing it, top the fiction. And did you have to make any of those changes, you felt, or?
I actually had really great experiences with editors. Before I even got a literary agent, I worked with someone who is a self-proclaimed book doctor, an editor. And she did a deep read of it and gave me some really meaningful feedback. There was no pressure to take any of the changes, but there were some really good ideas in there, and I did. I went back and sort of reworked it. This is all during the pandemic, so I had a little more space and time to do it. And then when I did get a literary agent, she said, "This is in really good shape." And typically, she says, I usually work with my clients to really rework it. You know, all the writers in the room, you know how it is. But she said, let's see. And so the acquisitions editor who wanted it, she said, we'll put it through a copy edit and then a proofread. And the copy, she said, I have hand selected the copy editor because I think she will get the story. She's from the South. And it was just, the comments that came back were just amazing. She caught a lot of inconsistencies, which, it's not about the truth of the story. I really appreciate that. But she gave some really supportive comments like this. I think this works because you might consider doing something else here, maybe this. there was no expectation, there was no pressure, which I was surprised and really happy about. I did make quite a few edits. I cut 7,000 words from it. And like, for example, I cut a whole chapter, just took it out because it didn't serve the story. I love the chapter. It was about Philbert and his older brother, Adam. It was called The Christmas Caper. And they had a little escapade on Christmas Eve. And it was, I intended it to be a little bit of a frolic and a relationship building moment for them. But it really was, it just didn't fit. So I did take that out. And then it went through a proofreading. And that was it was a little, so it is not correctly written. There are words that don't exist. You know, I use, and not even in dialogue, but I use the word jungly. And jungly is not a word. I said, if that comes back changed, it is going back to jungly because it just belonged there. I felt that strongly about it. And so it came back correct. I said, nope, not doing this. We're going to go back to the earlier version. We can revisit it. And the publisher and the acquisitions editor said, totally get it. I agree. That's fine. So no, I never felt any pressure. It was a really good experience. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think you did more of? Fictionalizing because you just really couldn't remember stuff, or fictionalizing because, as you said, you thought, no, this makes sense to put it in 72 than 68?
I decided to fictionalize it because I thought it was more interesting. And I think I'm more of a creative writer than an actual, ability to quantify things as they happen. I was amazed at what I did remember after I started to get into it. It just comes back to you. It's shocking how much will come back to you. So I thought it was, it's just the kind of person I am. I also don't think you probably figured this out with the few minutes we've shared together, but I don't really think in a straight line, a linear line. I think, I just like, oh, that sign is white and green. I love green. And, something over, I hear a sound over here and my attention, I'm very distractible. So I have to really try to focus to stay on point. And I like that about me. I didn't always like it, but I've come to accept it. Like, that's who I am. That's what makes me the person I am, as is my, oddly shaped body. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm beyond all that. I'm okay. But the way I write is because of that. And I like that about me. So I did it intentionally.
I was curious what your family, like what the response to this book was, because I was wondering if you actually went and talked to them about some of the experiences.
Yeah.
I'll talk to my sisters about something that happened, and it's the same thing, but it'll be totally different. So I was wondering if you had those conversations with your family.
I love that question because, so if you'll allow me, I have a couple of examples of the reaction. So the first reaction was from my father. I didn't tell anybody until I signed a publishing deal because I knew I wouldn't go through with it. I told him ahead of time. So after I signed the deal, I went to visit my parents, and this was a year and a half or so ago. And we live in the same small frame house that I grew up in. And in the front, there's a cutout in the front porch, cement slab. And there's one, those wrought iron posts of the front porch, two thin curly QS holding it together. So there's one of those holding, the ceiling up at the edge of the house. So years ago, I went back home after I had moved away, and they had closed that in. It was used to be about the size of a VW bug. Now it's the size of 2 VW bugs. They extended it, closed it in. And they left that post in the middle of the room. I walked in, I said, why didn't you take that thing out of there? It's in the dead center of the room. Well, the ceiling had fallen in. I said, you could engineer that out of there. Just take it out and put a beam across. He said, well, it's in there now. And so on either side of that post are two recliners. My mother's is on this side, my father's on this side. He is always in that chair, watching the television, like this. And that post is a kind of shelf. has oftentimes a walking cane on it. Other things, I won't mention other things he hangs on it, but he often has his hand on it like that. And he slouches down, and he's watching that television. He's got his hand there. And I walk up to him, he never looked at me. And I'm standing over there. And I say, Daddy, yep, watching television. I have some news. Yep. I wrote a book. You wrote a what? I wrote a book. I wrote a novel. You wrote a novel? Yeah. Is it going to be a hardback? It's the only thing you wanted to know. The only thing I thought, that was easier than I thought. That's good out of that room. And so then the questions started coming, but that was the initial contact on that point. And then after the book came out, I went to, and actually I was headed on book tour, and Robert was there. He and I were headed to an event together, and Robert heard this. So they had this sheet of paper, this big sheet of paper, and written on it were 2 columns of words. One column were names of characters from the book, main characters, cameo appearance characters. The other column, names of real people. They had mapped real people to the characters. They said, did we get it right? Did we get it right? And I said, I'm not going to confirm or deny any of that. And so, but more seriously, I've gotten, and I was concerned, you know, especially cousins and my parents and my brother, you know, because it's the essence of our lives. It's fiction, but you can recognize the world, and everyone has really rallied around me. They've said, we had no idea it was so difficult for you. You were very good at hiding it. I said, yeah, I was. And they said, and some of the cousins have said, it just takes me back to that time. You know, I can smell the sounds of the turnips and the cornbread cooking. I can see it, you know. And they said, we didn't know. I'm sorry. And that's been everything. So it's been a wonderful reception for my family.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does your experience as a performer allow you to build character and discover voice in a way that you then embody and live as you're writing? I noticed that you take on characters as you've done the reading, and also I noticed your edits and how you did that because of the way it would flow in terms of like performance. So how did performance assist you?
I think I've always at heart wanted to be a storyteller, and being an actor was definitely an attempt to fill that need. And because I've always on the fly written, and my career, you know, my day jobs have always been in that storytelling area too. I worked for PR firms, and so helping, you know, sort of message products and things like that. And my first job at the Library of Congress was to help war veterans tell their stories, oral history stories. So being on stage and telling, you know, using the words of other writers, I think it really did help me sort of even subconsciously soak in what it means to understand the story arc. I think it did help. And I'm grateful for that training. I didn't know that I didn't know that was what it was, but I do think that theater was a huge, important part of making me who I am. And I'm grateful for that. Yeah. Thank you. I love that reason. We've got good questions.
Is there an audiobook version of your book? Will there be? And would you want to be the reader?
There is an audio
You
version,
should be.
and I did not. Oh, thank you. I did not read it. Pete Cross. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I just, my eyes won't hold out to read. And who can, you know, it's difficult sometimes to sit down and find time to read. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks. And there was a voice actor, his name is Pete Cross, and he narrated so many books that I've listened to. And I thought, I wish Pete Cross could narrate the book. And then an email came. So when Blackstone bought the rights, they said, you will have an opportunity to comment on the talent, you know, make your, you know, suggestion. we will make the ultimate decision, but we will definitely take into account what you think. And the email came with audio reels with voice actors reading part of the book. And one of them said, Pete Cross. And I thought I was gonna fall on the floor. And I didn't even have to listen to the reels. They were all wonderful. But it was just everything that I could have hoped for. And beyond that, he's the loveliest person. He's so talented. And after he recorded it, we talked a few times, and he said, I wish I had had this book when I was 11 years old. It would have made all the difference. So that's, what's better than that?
Did he grow up in the South?
Not in the South,
No.
but in the rural. He's in Ohio, so in the rural, in that kind of thing.
I wanted to ask you. I know it's always in here, but do you always travel with your Georgia Red Clay?
Always. And so I know that y'all know what red clay is. I'm not showing you anything. But so this is, I mentioned that my parents and I had a really rough time of it for a while. This is, I think, shows you how far we've come in those many years since I finally told them how I was, or tried to. So my parents and my older brother, they properly washed and dried Duke's mayonnaise jar.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Dukes.
that is.
And they filled six of these, and they shipped them to me in Washington. So I have carried this, it goes in my check-in luggage. I've taken it all over the country because some people have never been here and they don't know. They said, it's really red. I said, it's red. And you should smell it. You should touch it. And because you all know, but I'll pass it around if y'all want. It ought to be here. I don't want
Interactive. We can do that. That's fine.
but it's just, it just takes me back. That's what in my time machine trick in my box. And I have one that sits next to my computer too, and a bunch of several Matchbox cards too. But yeah, it takes me back, and I think it's a treat for people to have a little bit of Georgia hand delivered to them.
We're talking about taking us back. We'll go back to the idea of the fictional memoir, and we'll talk about danger zones for writers to avoid, or even areas where they might want to lean in, or in your estimation.
Well, writing a fictionalized memoir is it's stating your truth. It's telling the world who you are. It really is. And it has to be, or it's empty. There is the potential, I guess, to hurt people, and nobody wants that. We don't want to hurt anybody. And I think that there are several ways to avoid that. The simplest thing, and it may work, it may not. It depends on your story and the situation, but you can change names. Maybe it's as simple as a name change. And you can say your truth, describe the incident, the words, whatever it was. Maybe that's not enough. Maybe creating a character out of whole cloth and assigning whatever it is you need to say to that character that you made up. You can also just change the timeline, and I moved things around to suit the story arc that I wanted to share. And maybe that way, if you put it in a different time during your story, maybe it won't be associated with the person you're concerned about. And to be truthful, people don't recognize themselves. I've looked at that list. It's being filmed. I've looked at that list. They got some things wrong. People don't recognize themselves. I was told that people aren't going to know. I said, no, I don't think people will know. It's true. A lot of people don't really recognize themselves in these words. So those are some ways to do it. The other thing to do is, so be true to yourself. If you decide that you're not going to do anything to disguise what's going on, what happened, then there are some ways to minimize what could be damage or hurt to someone. And I think what that is to never attack, never do it in a mean spirit, and try to balance the story that you're telling. Try to balance that difficult part with kindness and love, and You know, if you balance your overall story in that way, it's easier to accept the more difficult parts of it. So that's my advice on how to navigate that really difficult terrain. Where to lean in, I think it goes back to being an observer, goes back to Charles Dickens, and you know, lean into the description, tell the story of the world that you lived, because you're the best person to tell that. That's your unique voice. And that's what I try to do. I move some things around to suit the story. And I try to build this description of a world that I saw and felt in my heart. And I think that made it my true authentic story.
We're getting close to the end here, so I've got one more question here, but does anybody have any questions they want to address? Okay. No. I'm going to pay attention to my notes here because there's
Okay.
words that I want to make sure I get right. Okay, but your Great Clay Suzie has gotten a lot of praise from readers, from reviews, and that has to obviously feel good. It's been referred to as immersive and rich, deeply moving and lyrical, to touch on a few. And I'm curious, as somebody who has taken their personal experience and fictionalized or not, compiled it into a book, especially with it being such a difficult journey and traumatic journey for you as a child, what does that feel like to have that sense of praise and validation for the story that you've told about you?
It's been a revelation, I swear, because I was terrified to put it out there. But I hoped it would have an impact that would help people. And that was bigger than my fear. But, you know, I mentioned earlier that I came out to my parents 30 years ago, and this book has been my second coming out. And to have it well received is just validation that what I've done means something, has a positive impact. And so I'm grateful for all of it. But the biggest gift of all this, when like I had an event in my hometown this week, and a bunch of people from high school, people I know my entire life, oh yeah, I remember you. But there were a bunch of high school kids there. And one said off to the side, he said, I think I have the same skeletal condition that you have. And he said, thank you for, you know, writing about it. And that made me feel that this is important to reach, you know, someone who is similar in that way. So it's been a revelation.
I feel like I'm obliged to ask. So what's next? What is the next project in mind?
Well, I see CLAY SUZIE as the foundation of a 3-book story arc. And so this is not the end of Philbert and Knox's journey. And I have a rough draft of the next book. It is way too long. And it's rough, as I mentioned. So that's what I'm working on. I also have an idea for another, like a completely different story that I'm really excited about. And I've begun to outline it. So that's what's next for me. I think. So
Is it a rough outline?
it's a rough outline too. Yeah, it's not complete either.
Any last questions?
Do you have a title for the next one?
I don't know. Maybe Red Clay Filbert. It's the working title.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank
for
you.
this.
Association, to Eagle Eye Bookshop, and to UZAC. Thank you. And to friends in the audience who have been such supporters and dear friends. I'm just so grateful to be here. Thank you.
Eagle Eye does have copies of Red Clay Suzie up at the counter. They run out. There appears to be one more right here. So Jeffrey will be happy to sign and colorify the title page for you. Thank you again for coming out, and thank you again to Eagle Eye, and Again, broadleafwriters.com if you're curious about more programs that we do. Otherwise, have a great day and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.